Big Senate race and a multitude of congressional races means the nation's capital is keeping a very close eye on what's happening right here in the Buckeye State. Joining us via Skype from Washington, D.C. is our friend and colleague, Columbus Dispatch Washington Bureau Chief Jonathan Riskind. Jonathan, good to see you.
It's great to see you guys. Well, I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Well, we'll just have to go with that. Hey, Jonathan, I mean, you're there on the Hill. The environment, seemingly, as we approach Labor Day, appears to be shaping up very similar to 1994. Gallup is now reporting a 30-point enthusiasm gap between Republicans and Democrats, with Republicans much more enthusiastic to go out and vote. Charlie Cook, perhaps the most respected analyst there on the Hill, very nonpartisan analyst, is now predicting a Republican takeover of the House. What is your view of what's happening on the Hill, and is this potential Republican tsunami real?
Well, my view is it's hard to tell yet just how big a tsunami, how big a tidal wave it's going to be. As a matter of fact, I get into that a little bit in my Sunday column in the Dispatch as well this week. I mean, Stu Rothenberg, another very well-respected handicapper here in D.C., nonpartisan, is a little less enthusiastic than Charlie is. He's talking about a 28 to 33 seat net gain right now for Republicans, but noting that it could be a lot bigger. And what we're talking about is Republicans need a 39-seat net gain. Will they get it? I mean, that would be a big tidal wave, and a lot can happen between now and November. And you really have to look on a race-by-race basis. They need to sweep pretty much all of the toss-up races. You know, they need a lot of wins out there, and they need everything to break their way, as happened in 1994. Will it happen? It could happen. I mean, certainly that's the view from Washington, that this could happen. But there's also a lot of people saying the Democrats do have some advantages. They've got a lot of money to play with. They've got some well-funded incumbents. They've known this is coming for a long time, and vulnerable incumbents like Mary Jill Kilroy of Columbus have had a long time to prepare for this. So I think it's still an open question what's going to happen, and I think you can plausibly argue either way. Now, what no one would argue is that Democrats are not going to lose seats. The argument is over how many seats they'll lose.
Jonathan, what's the view of the Senate race here in Ohio from the outside looking in? I mean, is there any kind of firewall for Lee Fisher? Rob Portman has consistently led in public opinion polls. He has a huge fundraising advantage in what seemingly is a Republican year. Is there any sort of firewall for Lee Fisher, and is there an expectation that he could win this race from Washington?
Well, I think that the danger for Lee Fisher right now is that the view in Washington starts to sort of is one that forgets about the Ohio Senate race and sort of says, okay, that was a Republican seat held by George Voinovich, and it's going to stay Republican. Rob Portman's going to win, and from a national perspective, we're going to move on and worry. And from a national perspective, from the Democratic Party, we're going to move on and worry about other seats. That's the danger that Lee Fisher is in right now. It isn't quite there yet, I think, but it's a danger. Stu Rothenberg, who I mentioned before, just a few days ago moved that race from pure toss-up to toss-up tilt Republican, noting, as you said, Rob Portman's advantages in the polls, his huge money advantage. So I think that this is a very precarious time right now for Lee Fisher's campaign. And if Washington and the National Party decides that that's one that they don't have the resources to worry about too much amid everything else going on, and he's left out on his own with not a whole lot of money, it's going to be a tough one for him.
Fisher, Jonathan, has run this campaign with this Washington bashing, and that seems to be a little awkward, at least from perspective here, because Washington right now is controlled by the Democrats. Fisher venting more at former President Bush, but lots of voters think the president is President Obama and that Congress is controlled by the Democrat. Has that been an indication that Fisher's campaign hasn't really hit the right note yet?
Well, I think Fisher's campaign thinks that it has to run against Portman from the point of view of running against Portman as a member of the Bush administration. And the Democrats have, I think, and President Obama just have been testing the run against Bush theme. Again, clearly that's something National Democrats are going to try to do. Don't go back to the ways of the past. Don't go back to the Bush years, that kind of thing. And of course, Rob Portman was a budget director for Bush, a trade representative for Bush, and trade's a sensitive issue in Ohio. So I think it's something that Lee Fisher has to do. But you're right, it's awkward for him because he's an insider. He's a member of the Strickland administration, and he was the development director, the so-called job czar So it's tough. I mean, he'll say, Rob Portman's and George Bush's policies cost us jobs since 2000, and then Portman comes back and says, well, Ohio's lost, hundreds of thousands of jobs since you've been, in office, and you're the job czar. And so I think right now voters are just mad and angry about the economy, and I'm not sure, it's going to be tough for Fisher to make the case that they should blame Portman more than him. I just think right now they're just mad in general,
Jonathan,
and they blame everybody.
Two House seats that we're particularly paying attention to, if indeed this Republican tidal wave is approaching. The incumbent Steve Driehaus in Cincinnati, Democrat, could be vulnerable. Mary Jo Kilroy, I think, is listed as most vulnerable Democrat in the state. That's the 1st and 15th districts. What's the view on them? Are they competitive, or could they be swept up in a Republican year?
Well, I think right now the view from Washington is that they're competitive. I mean, I don't think anybody thinks it's going to be, an easy win for Steve Stivers against Mary Jo Kilroy in the 15th, or for former Representative Steve Chabot in his rematch against Steve Driehaus in the 1st. But clearly those are tough races for these two freshman Democrats. I mean, Chabot has been raising a lot of money. He was a popular congressman who lost in a very bad year for Republicans in 2008. And so, it's going to be an interesting race to see if he can come back and win that. And he seems to be in a pretty good spot there. The Stivers-Kilroy race, I think now is being rated by some of the pundits that we've mentioned as leaning Republican, but it's, I think, going to be a tough race still.
We're already seeing in the 15th a lot of negative campaigning on both sides. The Stivers campaign is a lot punchier than it was 2 years ago. They're throwing a lot more punches at Kilroy. Do you think this is just going to degenerate into a mud fest? And if so, voters are going to be confused and they'll vote for a third-party candidate, or they just won't vote?
It definitely is going to be a highly negative race. I mean, both sides are going negative, which is always a sign that both sides think it's a close race. There's also, I think, going to be a lot of outside money in this race, and so that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Of course, as you know, James, Stivers was hurt 2 years ago by the third-party candidates, and a lot of people think he would have won that race if not for a decent percentage of the vote going to third-party conservative-oriented candidates. Could that happen again this year? You're closer on the ground than I am, but it seems like that. There still is that possibility of losing a couple percentage points to third party, like the Libertarian candidate, for instance, is pretty active. So it seems like there still is, that possibility.
Jonathan, we just have about 20 seconds left, but very quickly, what is when Speaker Boehner is mentioned on Capitol Hill, when that title, Speaker Boehner, is mentioned, what is the reaction as we approach Labor Day and the potential that could be a reality?
Well, I mean, right now, John Boehner is out there trying to make himself, perhaps, if not the national face of the Republican Party, one of the top national faces of the Republican Party. He had a speech in Cleveland, as you all know, this past week, and it was really heavily covered by the national press. I think John Boehner is all in at this point. The view in Washington, I think, in part is if the Republicans do not win the House, I think there's a lot of eager young gun conservative Republicans that will say he didn't succeed when he should have, and he's not even going to be the minority leader anymore. If the Republicans win the House, he is almost certainly going to be the Speaker of the House, and it'll be interesting to see where that goes for the next 2 years, because he has not had a good relationship with President Obama. It'll be interesting to see, as the Speaker in the majority, and Republicans having to get some things done as a majority party in the House if they take it over. Interesting to see how his relationship will proceed with President Obama for 2 years.
It will be interesting. Of course, we all remember Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton. Some would argue that Newt Gingrich is the best thing that happened to Bill Clinton back in 1994. Maybe John Boehner and Barack Obama will have the same relationship, potentially beginning next January. All right, Jonathan Riskind, our good friend in Washington, thank you so much for your analysis and insight. We'll be right back here on Capitol Square.